I think as an elementary and secondary school student, I had a lot of good teachers. It's hard for me to think about, I can think of, really one teacher with whom I had an unsatisfactory relationship the whole time I was in elementary and secondary school. Um, but of course, just because people are uh, good people doesn't mean that they're somehow therefore protected from passing on their, the broader kind of environment to you in ways that aren't always helpful. And I mean, I think about, I'll just offer one example. My ninth grade Bible teacher, wonderful guy, gracious, friendly, good human being. Can't say enough good things about him as a person. But I don't think you have any real idea when you're in that kind of position how much you influence vulnerable young minds. And I still remember, he had learned, whether he realized it or not, at the feet of the Puritans. And I just remember he talked about the evils of idolatry in the Puritan sense, and just pointed out that, of course, there are all kinds of things you could idolize, and one could certainly idolize a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that was ninth grade. And I don't know how many years after that I spent feeling guilty because I, quote, idolized people in whom I was romantically interested. It was horrible, because it meant that every time I was seriously interested in somebody romantically, I was feeling guilty because I was idolizing that person. And, this nice, friendly, helpful guy had no interest in making me neurotic, but, you're a vulnerable ninth grader and you're sitting at the feet of somebody here, and it sinks in. It sinks into your psyche. And,
yeah, I spent way too much time with the nutters. It's like it's only in adulthood now as I look back and realize that there are lots of well-balanced Adventists, but I was around so many nutters that I got totally warped, and I just associate Adventism with nutterdom in my head, which is like totally unfair, because there are plenty of like healthy, psychologically balanced,
sure,
socially adjusted Seventh-day Adventists. But I was with the nutters who were like obsessed with eschatology, and it was just it wasn't balanced.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, it is probably unavoidable, because so your dad's charismatic, but he's not only charismatic, but he's talking about the things that group of people is interested in.
Right.
If he'd been charismatic and talking about chemistry, he might have avoided some of them. But I mean, I just think when I go to a public meeting in an Adventist church, but parenthesis, I think this is true in any public setting. I think it's true when you listen to talk radio. I think these people come out of the woodwork. And I know, sitting in a public meeting, I mean, tomorrow afternoon, if there are questions, I know that those people are going to end up at the microphone. If there are public questions, those people are going to end up at the microphone, and we'll hear loopy stuff. But I'm asking myself as we're talking, how much of that is Adventism? Because again, I think when I listen to a call-in show on the radio, I know that there are going to be people who call up with their odd little hobby horses who just want the opportunity to share them with the listening public. And it's so I mean I don't know whether you could avoid the nutters as long as any kind of public event was going on, and obviously your dad was somebody who couldn't be very far from the limelight for very long. So.
I wonder how much of my like sneering contempt for humanity is genetic, and how much is just from being Desmond Ford's son and having these nutters come around. I'd say by ninth grade, I'd really developed this very honed just contempt, and people would come over to talk to my dad, and I'd wind them up without being
because they
obvious.
were almost always the sort of people who lent themselves to being wind up.
Yeah, yeah, and so I try to get them to talk to me about back lacing lyrics, rock lyrics. I got so much of that about you play certain rock songs
Yeah,
backward.
sure.
And
Oh, that
say,
was come on. I was in high school at the same time you were.
I
read
got
this.
so much of that, and
Yeah.
so I'd try to wind these people up and tell me about that, and there's conspiracy theories about rock music and television, and all the.
Do you remember John Todd? Did you get them to talk about John Todd? You remember that guy?
Yeah, who is that? That's very familiar.
John Todd was a guy who made the rounds in Adventism in the late 70s and early 80s, announcing that he was a kind of escapee from the Illuminati. And
Yeah.
he,
Yeah, the Illuminati.
yeah.
I remember in high school I read 20 books on the Kennedy assassination, all the different conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
That was what was
Yeah.
going. John Todd and the Illuminati and the show on the dollar bill, the peak of the triangle.
Exactly.
And I don't know who's going to stand up and speak tomorrow, but obviously my dad got thrown out for denying the doctrine of the heavenly sanctuary, and the doctrine of the heavenly sanctuary is just like a gold mine for nutters. You can really go off on that and just.
It's interesting, by the way, and I don't know if you remember him, but it's not just the loopy folks who show up at the microphone at these public events, but some people in relatively responsible positions in Adventism. The person in Adventism who kind of legitimized this kind of stuff for me, in some sense, as a junior high student, whom you may remember as an older contemporary of your dad's from Australia, Roy Allen Anderson. He was he was a guy who was a professor at Loma Linda who was a big enthusiast for this stuff, and his books were laced with these Illuminati stories and so forth.
Yeah, it's like how come I didn't grow up with balanced folks? I grew up with these nutters. They were just all over. It was just and I just developed such a contempt from that. And the other thing that I hated about my Adventist upbringing was that competition was a dirty word. I didn't want you competing with other people.
Right.
And I was a lousy student because the only thing that gets me motivated is competition. Because I wanted to smash, clobber, stomp, and destroy my enemies or people I competed against. That's what gets me motivated in the morning. And because that was wrong and I wasn't allowed to, I couldn't do any schoolwork because you weren't allowed to compete. It was like a bad to want to destroy people.
Well, and I've never said this to you, but that's what I most remember about you from 7th grade. Because you were the guy who terrified me by destroying me at Stratego.
Yeah, what was Stratego? What was that game?
It was sort of somewhere between military strategy and chess.
I love that game. Yeah, I wanted to destroy people.
You were deadly. It was, I think I remember kind of wanting to play that with you as much as anything, probably because I just wanted to engage with you. Maybe, this is this guy's sort of this, terrifying, intense figure, and, maybe I can be his friend this way, but, so meanwhile.
Yeah, I was out for blood, and it was like a dirty word. I wanted to have debates.
Mm-hmm.
I was always wanting to have debates, and I wanted to argue things, and I just always wanted to fight, and there was no very limited socially acceptable ways to do that because you weren't supposed to want to fight people in Adventism.
Well, it's interesting that that's we all ought to get along, but at least so I have a stereotype which I'd be glad for you to dispel, but I just have the sense that. A culture of aggressive engagement is endemic to Australian Adventism. So, it may be that you're not supposed to be officially competing, but I just perceive that world as being marked by this kind of in-your-face style, which may be more broadly Australian. It may not just be Adventism, but
Yeah, that's interesting because they are much more verbally aggressive